This is Cup of Go for November 24, 2023. Keep up to date with the important happenings in the Go community in just 15 minutes per week. I'm Jonathan Hall.
And I'm Shay Ahmad.
Good morning, Shay.
Good morning. Sorry for the low energies, everyone. We're both on the verge of being too sick to make the episode.
but the show must go on.
Yeah, the show must go on. And also we have some tea and coffee in our beautiful mugs. Let me get some Foley work in here. Check it out. That's for all the ASMR people. All right. We don't have a proposal news this week because, the proposal team is on vacation.
Yeah, those silly Americans are all doing Thanksgiving instead of reviewing our proposals.
Yeah. So we're going to cover some different things today. But first, let's do conferences and call for papers and whatever. What's going on in Berlin?
Yeah, so GopherCon Berlin, this is the one we all know and love. If you're in Europe, it's coming up June 17 to 20. You may recall last week we talked about GopherCon in Athens, which is being added this year. So there's actually 2 European GopherCons this year. But the Berlin one, CFP, is open through February 18. So you have plenty of time to think about what you're doing, but don't procrastinate too long because you don't want to forget.
Yeah, and I'm going to come in with the urgency. Paged Out is looking for 1-page articles until tomorrow. So if this strikes you with inspiration, you want to write a 1-page article about programming, hacking, anything security related, demo scene, and obviously specifically Go. Paged Out is a super, super great newsletter. I've written in the first 2 issues. It's run by Jinvel. I really like the guy. And you have until tomorrow. So if this strikes you with inspiration and you have this one thing you really wanted to write about for a while, stop listening now. Just go write it. It's 1 page. You can totally do it and hand it in. Call for paper closes tomorrow. I'm planning to do it. I've procrastinated writing a thing with my wife. And I really hope to just hunker down tonight and write a thing. Although it's not going to be about Go, but still. And even if you don't want to write, go check out Paged Out. The first 2 issues are really, really good. And I think it's a lot of fun. It's very creative.
And just to be clear, for anybody listening in the future, if you didn't listen to this the day it's released, tomorrow means November 25th. That's when the CFP ends for the Paged Out.
Yeah, but go check it. They might delay the deadline. And even if not, you can follow and, subscribe to their newsletter and whatever. It's really high quality stuff. It's every article is being reviewed, and I've tried to hand in too. I learned a lot in the process. I got the feedback and reviews and whatever. And it's really hard to write short stuff. There's this famous quote, right? Sorry for the long letter. If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter, something like that. So that's call for papers. You have something to hand in tomorrow, and you have something to hand in February. And we would love to see your stuff.
So, Shai, I hear you like snakes. You've been using Python lately.
Ugh, don't even. I get the segue because you're going to go towards Cobra. But yes, I've been using Python. And honestly, I'm so over it. I'm so over, the Conda environment, the pip environment. And it's you have to run it on Docker. And PyCharm takes 15 seconds to load. So I try to use VS Code. And VS Code doesn't have the thing and blah, blah, blah. Ugh.
All right. So if you, like Shai, love Python so much, but you're looking for a reason to bring your love for snakes back to Go, Cobra has a new release out.
What does it include?
That might be the cheesiest, longest segue we've done in this entire show.
It was long and slithering, akin to a snake. All right. So Cobra is that library that you probably already know about together with Viper. It's usually a really good combo for environment variables, flags, and whatever. So Cobra is the flags part of it, used to write CLIs and stuff like that. And we have release 1.8.0, which has some bug fixes and maintenance stuff, but also has some cool features.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things is that it now supports usage as a plugin for tools like kubectl. So
kubectl?
Yeah.
No, kubectl or kubecontrol.
Well,
I'm not. This is gonna.
You're gonna die.
A house divided. I'm willing to accept canines. I'm willing to accept Gone W, but kubectl? Ain't nothing cuddly about Kubernetes clusters. They're sharp and pointy. Anyway, so what does it mean that it can be used as a plugin?
So, I mean, I've never written a kubectl or kubectl or kubecontrol plugin, but I think I think you can do the same with Git. Like you can create a binary called with Git. It's git-foo, and then it sort of as long as it has the right interface, it automatically gets called when you call git space foo. So I imagine it's the same sort of concept.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly what this feature does. So essentially, you can create a kubectl plugin executable, and then when you call kubectl space plugin, it executes it. but it needs to conform to the right command line argument formats and stuff like that. So it just makes it easier to do that sort of thing.
So what I'm wondering is what other kubectl plugins I would write because that's the example they gave, and Git is perfect as far as I'm concerned. I'm like wondering which kubectl plugin I would write with this feature. But I'm happy to see this PR because it makes a lot of sense. And
that'll be the questions at the end of your interview on the Kubernetes podcast. What would you add to?
Yeah, totally. I guess Helm could use some more plugins and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where you sort of define, like I've been writing a lot of scripting around Helm lately, so maybe that could help. Cool. There's also a lot of other features. If you use Cobra, you should probably upgrade anyways because it has some bug fixes and whatever. One thing that it's really nice to see. It's a lot of features around completion. So, if you like to install completions of Cobra commands, Tab is going to work a little bit better for you. Well, we said we wouldn't do proposal news, but there is one small proposal we want to mention about documentation.
Mm-hmm.
So CMD doc now supports a new syntax. What does that mean?
Have you ever been stuck using multiple versions of a particular library? Maybe you're using Cobra 1.8 and 1.7 on two different projects in your system.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And you want to look at the documentation for the one you're using at that moment, and you type Go doc and you get the wrong one.
So that happened kind of less for me because usually Go packages are kind of good with backwards compatibility. So looking at the latest documentation usually is good enough. But it happened once or twice with like database drivers and stuff like that.
Yeah. I've had it happen where I'm looking at the docs and it says, oh, here's this great feature. This is exactly what I need. I try to use it and it's not there because I'm stuck on an old version of the library. So basically Go doc will let you specify the version now. So you can do Go doc github.com/spf13/cobra at v1.7.0 or whatever to get the version that you care about. So that's kind of cool.
I would imagine, when I type Go doc in a package name, it would choose the right one based on the environment. So I guess this is a step towards that as well, right? Like if I'm in a specific directory, look at the Go mod and tell me the documentation for the correct version. But it's not there yet. I'll have to specify it manually. All right. And there's another release to a package near and dear to my heart, Hugo. I haven't been blogging for the last 2 months due to the situation here in Israel, but I do love blogging and I do love blogs. So every time Hugo releases a new version, I'm really happy about. It's already kind of old news because it's been in our backlog for a while, but they released 120. So it's like 0.120, which is a lot of minors. And it's a really cool feature where if you have something slow in your Hugo templates, which is very abnormal, when you build Hugo sites, it's very snappy normally. You could use a debug timer on the template to see why it's like rendering slowly. It's sort of profiling your Hugo build process, which is just the sort of, crazy attention to detail that people who use, static binaries to build their HTML sites to blog about how they build their site with static binaries would like. And I assume a feature that would be useful for 2 people in reality. But I just love seeing it. There's a whole bunch of other notes, but that's, I think, the highlight, and a whole bunch of improvements and, making stuff a string and markdowns and emojis and deprecating some old stuff, deprecating Google Analytics, which I'm happy to see because it's been really hard to maintain it because Google have been changing their analytics engine with a month notice ahead. So it's no longer natively supported in Hugo, which is great. But yeah, mostly the debug timer in the template, which I really like. And if you build your sites with Hugo, it should be super easy to upgrade because it's usually very backward compatible and you just get more speed and more features every time you upgrade.
I think I'm still on 111.
Oof. You have 9 versions to go. Now is the question if you do it incrementally or if you just jumped to 120 and hope that the site doesn't break. Although with Hugo, I wouldn't worry too much. It's probably going to be fine.
I'll probably jump. The reason I stick on a fixed version is I have had it break once or twice in the past. And they removed a deprecated feature or something. So as long as it's working, I kind of stick with what I have for a while. But it's time to upgrade.
All right. And we have one last release we want to talk about, VS Code Go.
Yeah, so VS Code Go 0.40.0 was released. I'm already using it. The big addition here is that it uses the newest version of GoPLS, which means it has telemetry opt-in support. I have opted in to telemetry on both my laptop and my desktop machines, but it also adds a few other things, or in a sense removes a few things. Apparently there were some refactorings that VS Code had implemented themselves that are now part of GoPLS. So they could sort of remove those from VS Code and just rely on the GoPLS version. And then, of course, a few bug fixes and things like that. But the big news here is that you can now opt in to telemetry for GoPLS if you're using VS Code.
I love the Go VS Code features. Stuff like fill struct and extract to function are just like such useful shorthands. And I use VS Code like with Vim bindings. I've been convinced to live to colon WQ Vim into VS Code is just too good. And it's nice to see the package being maintained. If you do want to opt into telemetry as well, and I don't want to influence opinions too much, but I definitely think you should, for like the good of the language maintainers. There's a command here that you can run. If the prompt like jumps up and you ignore it, like I do for every single VS Code prompt, there's a command you can run as well. Go run blah, blah, blah telemetry on. And it just turns on Go telemetry for you on your machine. We have the release in the show notes, so you can grab that command and run it. Any piece of data helps other than the garbage data, which they still don't have a good solution for. All right, so that's it for releases. And we have a few cool things we want to talk around the community we saw. So one blog post that we saw all over the place, I think in Golang Weekly, and Mihai popped it in a few places, is about nil panic detection at Uber. And it's a really, really good blog post, really well written. The way I measure really well written stuff is if they have, a flow chart and I can just look at the flow chart instead of reading the entire article, then we're good. So that's exactly what this is. You have two flow charts and I'm just going to describe them. And then you can go read the article. The first flow chart describes the problem. In Go, it's a statically typed language, right? So you shouldn't have errors where you put a number where a string should be. But there is one elusive type which can harm you at runtime, which is?
I can think of more than one.
I'm talking about nil, right?
Nil.
Unexpected nil error is something we want to avoid. Null pointer exceptions if you come from Java and whatever. And they can be elusive. Obviously, you can put like x equals nil and then x dot something. And, that's pretty obvious to catch. But, when you go into internal structs and sometimes they return nil and sometimes they don't return nil and they return an interface and an interface can be nil, but you almost always expect it to not be, you can end up returning a nil interface value from some like internal function and you get unexpected nil errors in runtime, nil panics. Right? Which you see like panic, runtime error, invalid memory address, or nil pointer dereference, which you really don't like to see. There's an example here from the net library, from the standard library. So this is not just some, error that happens to like beginners, and after a week you're never going to do it again. It happens in the standard library as well. So that's like the first flowchart, right? You return nil somewhere, you expect it to be non-nil someplace else. You end up with a runtime error. Uber, which has a huge Go monorepo, built something called Nilaway, which has a pretty cool architecture. You shove in Go code, and it has an analyzer engine, an inference engine, and an error engine, which all run like one after another, parallel and like it should be very low latency. And it outputs nil panic errors by statically analyzing the code. So you'll meet these errors a lot earlier, which is a great benefit to your CI process or, your development process. You can just save on discovering these errors in production. It is fast. It is kind of precise. I think they aim to avoid false positives. So they might have a few like true negatives, but they really don't want you to inspect anything that might waste your time. And it seems like it's kind of fully automated. You don't have to set anything up to use it. They show some example here where, if you dereference something from a closed channel, it will throw nil, and their analyzer finds it, which I wouldn't find in code review. Even if you showed me this code and you were like, what's the error? I don't think I would have caught that. So a really, really cool tool. And also something cool they share is, they have these like nil panics. They are statistical every now and then they deploy it and the chart doesn't have the errors anymore, which is really good marketing, I guess, for a tool like that. It's open source. You can just go to uber-go Nilaway. I think if you implement code in Go and you don't want nil panics, just try and implement it. I really hope it will integrate into like Golang CI-lint and will become default as time goes on. For now, it's an Uber thing and you have to install it separately, which is a bit of a hassle, but definitely worth checking out. I also think I looked at the code a bit, and the code itself is pretty interesting, like analyzing stuff and whatever. It is active development, right? It's early, so I wouldn't trust it 100% to catch all nil errors. And if you have code review processes at your company, I wouldn't throw them away. But I think it's a good tool to add to your arsenal. So check it out. Obviously, the link is in the show notes.
Very nice. So apparently there's been some news this last week at OpenAI. I don't know. I don't really follow the news.
What happened?
It's a lie. I do follow that news. But we're not going to talk about all that. We're talking about something else at OpenAI. That is, they've recently made it possible to use ChatGPT to sort of create your own custom chatbots. And I've seen a number of these pop up, all Go related. So there's links to 3 of them in the show notes. There's Go for Bro, which gets my vote for least popular name. There's Moss, the Go expert, stylized after Moss from the IT crowd.
Yeah, have you tried turning it off and on again?
And then Golang Mentor. So those are the 3 that I have linked in the show notes. I'm sure there's 1,000 others out there. I'm curious if anybody here has tried one of them or multiples of them, and how has it been going? Stop by the Cup of Go Slack channel and let us know your experience with ChatGPT or one of the ChatGPT Go-specific chatbots. Has it helped you?
So there's one thing I asked Moss, which is, if you were to remove one feature for Go, what would you remove? I don't really like the answer. It was like nil value for slices and maps. So it doesn't want nil value for slices and maps. It claims it would simplify, reduce errors, and be consistent with the language philosophy. But also it's like, it's important to know that this change would be a significant alteration to the language and might disrupt the existing code bases. Yeah, thank.
All right, interesting answer.
Yeah.
Stick around for our interview with Moss later on. No, I'm kidding.
No, we're not this year, maybe next year.
Yeah.
It's not there yet. I don't get I get it as a novelty fun thing, but I don't get it as a like productive tool, because you already have stuff integrated into VS Code. You already have, stuff that's reading your code in your context. But maybe for educational purposes, this could be good, or code review.
Well, I think we have one thing left on our backlog for today.
Yeah. One other thing we want to share about the community. So Miki, our first ever interviewee, has been like silently posting videos on Ardan Lab's channel. And I think they're really good. Short form, 1 to 2 minute videos. They're called Tabeka Shorts. Just sharing one specific feature that you might want to know about, whether it's detecting race conditions or using time equal instead of equals to compare times. It's like a 1 minute, 17 seconds video. He released like 35 of these. So just, having this playlist to pass the time now and then when you're waiting in line or whatever, we can definitely recommend it. It's been pretty cool. The last one released is about rate limiting. And, I expected to watch it and just like be, oh, cool, Miki, I know this guy. But obviously I know everything the video is going to show. But no, he taught me about a new tool for load balancing called Hey, which I wasn't aware of. And now I just installed on my machine. So really cool short format stuff worth checking out. And I think that's it for today. Not a ton of news in the Go world, but also we're both low energy and sick. Thanks for sticking around. We have a cool interview coming up.
Yeah, we have an interview with Webb Morris, who is the co-founder of a company called Canopy, which uses Go to monitor remote devices. So stick around for an interview with Webb Morris.
Thanks for listening. Welcome to our ad break. We are not sponsored by anyone today. If you want to sponsor this show and grab this ad space, grab this attention, reach out to us and ask to buy it. If you want to reach out to us, you can go to cupogo.dev. That's our site. You can reach out to the community and connect to the rest of the listeners at the Gopher Slack at #cupogo, kebab case with hyphens, and email us at news@cupogo.dev. That is news@cupogo.dev. Please share the show. Could be cool. And we've had really good listenership recently, and it's really a lot of fun to see the community already forming like its internal jokes, internal like tribes and teams. It's like really forming. So it's a good time to join the bandwagon. A good way to let people know about the show is to leave a review. leave a review on Spotify, on iTunes, or wherever you listen to your podcast. But there's really nothing better than just sharing it with like a coworker or a friend that's interested in Go. Other than that, we have a sale on the merch store. You can check it out on the Go for Slack channels as well. And we might, depending on how hard it is to set up, have some apparel soon because someone asked for us to make a t-shirt. So there might be some new merch dropping as well. Thanks for listening and stick around for an interview with Webb Morris. Talk to you all next week. Bye-bye.
Welcome, Webb, to the show. I'm glad to have you here. I'm here with Webb Morris. Unfortunately, Shay is not able to make it to this interview today, so it's just the two of us today, Webb. Would you tell our audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how Go fits into your life?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jonathan. My name's Webb Morris. I'm the CTO and co-founder of an organization called Canopy. We're previously known as Banyan Hill Technology, but we recently rebranded our company to better reflect the product that we put out, which is called Canopy. Canopy is a remote monitoring and management platform that really is agnostic to the devices that we serve. And our goal is to help increase uptime and manageability of remotely deployed devices, typically that are in the unattended space. Things that don't necessarily have a human close to them to keep watch over them. So for us, we have an endpoint agent. We call it Leaf because that fits in with the idea of Canopy.
Yeah, okay.
And so Leaf is a bit of code that runs at the endpoint. It provides some of the smart of the solution, and it communicates telemetry about the devices that we have under management, and it also allows us to execute remote commands against those devices, and it's responsible for software upgrades and configuration upgrades at the endpoint. And it's written in Go, and we made that choice it's been almost 10 years ago now, which is kind of amazing to think about in terms of a decade of time spent developing and honing this product. But it was a great choice. We can talk a little bit about that if you'd like, and how we got to Go a few years ago. And that's where really we have the majority of our expertise is at the endpoint in Go. At the enterprise side and the cloud, we typically are running Java, Spring Boot, Groovy-based applications there from an ease of operating and an enterprise deployment model.
Very interesting. What kinds of devices are you monitoring then? Are these like custom-made embedded devices, IoT devices, Raspberry Pis? What kind of stuff are we talking about here?
Yeah, really all the above.
Okay.
But for the most part, our our sweet spot are devices that typically don't have an operating system. It'll be either some of the many flavors of Linux, or it might be Windows style devices that are at the endpoint. And these devices then are connected to other equipment that's there, generally for whatever purpose they're serving. So we have situations where we have security camera controllers that then Canopy responsible for monitoring and managing the fleet of security cameras, and it does so from a centralized controller that exists within the network. We have situations where what we refer to as kiosk style deployments, where you have a device. You could think of it like we have devices in hospitals that dispense and receive linens or scrubs, for example, and so the device itself has a primary function, and then Leaf lives on that device and is helping to monitor and manage the various mechanics of it. Think about bill pay style deployments. You might walk up to a kiosk in a store and you need to pay your bill or do some other sort of transaction, and then you've got devices like payment readers, receipts, maybe even bill collectors, things of that nature that are there. And then we also have a really wide range of kind of miscellaneous deployments. We have some deployments that are in large warehouses where we're helping to monitor and manage the controllers that are responsible for the refrigeration in those warehouses. So tracking the temperatures and pressures and things of that nature, some of them from a safety perspective. And then we have deployments where we're part of the manufacturing process. where maybe there's a small controller that exists that's helping to improve processes on a manufacturing line or things of that nature. And then finally, to your point, we do have some deployments where the actual product is an embedded product. You think of it, for example, like a smart power switch, for example. And in those situations, typically the firmware has been modified to be able to talk to our enterprise, and our actual endpoint agent isn't necessarily going to be on that device, at least not in the way that we think about it. But there's some equivalent embedded type of process there that's serving as leaf in those situations.
Fascinating. Let's jump back in time a little bit. So you said you've been using Go for this for about 10 years. I don't know if you can remember. I can barely remember what I had for breakfast. So I don't know if I can remember the details, but I'm curious, how did you choose Go and what were the alternatives you were considering at the time?
Yeah, it's funny. You're right. I barely remember what I had for breakfast, but I can definitely remember some of these decisions. They were really kind of formative to the company. So when we first started Canopy, there was myself and founder Steve Latham sitting at a table, and we had really our very first engineer that we had brought into the company to help us, sitting in a Starbucks, I think it was, or maybe it was like some other coffee shop, but. And we were talking about the vision for what we wanted Canopy to be. And we knew that we needed an agent at the endpoint to be able to collect the information that we wanted and to serve the purpose of doing the work. And as we discussed it, we kind of laid out the principles. And one of the key driving principles was that the agent needed to be agnostic to the operating environment in which we live. So it didn't matter. We knew that, the types of devices that we were going to encounter over the years were going to be diverse, and we weren't going to be able to control what our customers brought to the table, whether in terms of, device specifications, but also in terms of operating systems and environments that they were going to need to have. And so that was one of the first keys, was that whatever we build needs to be agnostic to where it's operating. And the second key was we knew it needed to be small. We knew it needed to be a compact type of application that didn't, take up a bunch of memory or CPU cycles, because we knew that these devices weren't going to have a lot of processing power with them. I mean, you can think back 10 years ago, we're talking about like the first generation Raspberry Pi was there. We weren't really talking about devices that had, a lot of processing power. And then we knew that we were going to have a relatively small team that was going to support the actual agent itself, which meant that we didn't want to have to write it in 4 or 5 different languages in order to support the process that we needed. So our lead engineer at the time took that input, and we got to work on some prototypes. Now, coming from really, kind of a Java as my first language background, we took a look at Java, and obviously it has, some of those promises built in,
Yeah, the write once, run anywhere promise is kind of the foundation, right?
Right, yeah, like 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
That was the idea. And so we looked at that, but honestly, it was very briefly. I'm sure most of the audience has probably had the experience of wanting to get Java someplace that it's not already, and then how difficult that can be sometimes, just in terms of getting the right, JDK or getting the right JRE and deploying it to the right spot. And obviously, Oracle has changed some of their licensing model as well, and so that plays into it. But then you've got obviously some good alternatives there with some different license terms as well. But at the end of the day, the biggest challenge with Java was deployment, and then of course the size. Even with the tiny JDKs that you're able to use, that size is just too much for us to be able to really feel like we'd be able to support it on the devices that we were looking at. And so then the next alternative that we looked at was Python. And I think we actually have a version of Leaf that was fully written in Python in terms of the base functionality. And we liked that operating environment. But the biggest challenge there, again, is just distribution and being able to essentially just send a native executable to a device, know that it's going to work and be compatible. And so, having to deal with a Python distribution and understanding if it was installed and if it wasn't installed and having to get it installed, it wasn't going to work for us. The same type of reasons that Java did. although it was much smaller. Obviously, we could do in Python, things that we could do in Java, which was right. So then our engineer brought us to Go. And at the time, there was, probably the biggest alternative to Go from just a native perspective was C or, C++. Because Rust hadn't really taken root yet, and wasn't really something that we felt like was ready for us to evaluate. And so as we started to look at Go, it really did tick the mark. It was a language that you could write code in that then we could natively compile any target system, at least any target system that we were concerned with, and then get a native executable that would just run on those environments. It produced executables even with, the static compilation where we're not having to depend on the dynamic libraries and the rest of it. It produced executables that were relatively small in size and that didn't take up a large footprint on the device. And then from a maintenance perspective, having a small team, again, it was we only had to write it once, and then we could figure out how to compile it for all the different targets that we have. And so that's why we landed there. And really, ever since we've been investing in Go for our endpoint agent, and it's been a pretty good decision. I mean, obviously, along the way, we've taken a pause and thought, all right, was there a different way that we should be doing this, or different technologies that might contribute? And so far, we haven't made a decision otherwise. Every time that we've evaluated it, both because of obviously the IP that we've built up in it today, but also just because the other alternatives don't really offer anything much more compelling over what we've already put together. So,
do you think if you were starting from scratch today, you didn't already have that library of working code, would you make the same decision again? Or I imagine you'd probably look more closely at Rust than you did back then.
Yeah, I definitely think we would look a lot closer at Rust if we started over again. If we were starting the same process today. I don't know that we've come to a different conclusion, but it would be a much closer race, I think, than we had then. Certainly, with the benefit of hindsight and with both of the languages being more mature than they were previously, then I don't necessarily think that there's a technical advantage one way or the other for the languages. So it really would come down to more of the developer community and, the adoption of the technology and where we saw it going versus where it is today would weigh heavily in those decisions.
I'm curious, you mentioned all the platforms you build on. How many platforms do you target?
Oh, goodness. Well, I guess it kind of depends on how you tell them.
Sure.
I can legitimately say that we're on, I think, every version of Windows and every flavor of Windows, 32-bit, 64-bit, whatever type of processor you want to put underneath it, from XP up into 11, right? I mean, and so I think we have things deployed that are still on XP, so I won't name those guys because I know they should.
No naming and shaming here.
Exactly. And then from a Linux perspective, I mean, it's as wide as you can imagine. We've got Leaf deployed on legitimately 20-year-old tiny devices that are running the most obscure old version of Linux that you've ever seen, up into brand new, fresh off the line, Raspberry Pis or, VMs spun up in cloud systems and everywhere in between. And from an architecture standpoint, we touch it all. We've actually, most of what we see is either ARM or, AMD64, but we've actually even deployed on top of the NIST architecture before for, like a embedded router type of situation where that was necessary.
Curious if you've ever used or maybe just considered using TinyGo?
No, honestly. We've never had a challenge with what we've been putting together, fitting within the confines of what we've got, but I will take that as a note to go and investigate.
I haven't used it either, but I know that it targets much smaller systems with much smaller memory capabilities. So it's an interesting topic to look at. You mentioned that you even have people running still Windows XP. Does that mean that you're still running old versions of Go? Because I think they dropped Windows XP support a year or two ago. I don't remember exactly when. I'm curious what versions of Go you're using.
Yeah, it's a good part of our journey too, to kind of think about some of what we've seen over the last kind of 10 years as we've been developing in it. For the longest time, and you'll forgive me, I'm not exactly sure what version it was, but we were on a relatively older version of Go, and then we had kind of got ourselves stuck there for a little bit. And so for those systems, that's typically, what we probably built those libraries against, or those executables against that are running there. But more recently, really in the last, call it 2 to 3 years, we've made a concerted effort to get current on across our technology base, but particularly with Go, because one of the challenges that we were having is that we were building most of our deployments pre the addition of the Go mod and Go Sum capabilities there, the Go modules. And so when we only had just a few people that were performing these, and we had maybe a centralized build server where that was occurring, then we could control some of the versioning a little bit better. But we were still getting some inconsistencies. You build it on Monday and you get one version of an included library. You build it on Tuesday, you get another version of an included library, and you're not really managing that very well. But a few years back, we made the decision, okay, we've got to get current here. And what that allowed us to do was to really transition all of our internal build processes, and then obviously what we're bringing in from the community to utilize the Go modules approach, where now we've got really defined versions for each of the things that we build and a much more repeatable build process. And that has been kind of life-changing for our support team because now when they get a build, and obviously our support team helps us to distribute the build out to existing customers, and then we have an implementation team that's putting it in for new customers, but they know, right? All right, this build has these features in it. It was, has these supporting libraries associated with it. So that when we do have issues or find bugs, that it's a lot easier for us to trace back to what we have going on there. Right. It's really been probably one of the most impactful bits of kind of technical debt that we've paid over the past year, just in terms of streamlining our processes and making our lives a little bit easier from a support and sustainability perspective.
Awesome. I'm curious if people are interested in learning about Canopy. The website is gocanopy.com. Is that a coincidence, or is that because you use Go?
Right. So it's more of a coincidence than not.
Yeah.
There's definitely, we won't get too deep into the marketing aspect of stuff. That will probably bore the pants off your audience here. But certainly we've looked at some domain names that don't include Go in them, but those are not currently available. We've always had gocanopy.io, and it kind of has served as our underlying internal domain. And then as we went through the rebranding effort from Banyan Hills to Canopy, we were able to acquire gocanopy.com, which is great because it's much easier to remember than banyanhills.com, and it actually is associated with the product that we've got. So, but yeah, I love the imagery, right, of Go, which is like, all right, let's get started, let's go. Yeah. And certainly from a philosophy that we try to have here at Canopy, that's the idea. Let's get started. Let's go do it. And in terms of our journey, Go has certainly been facilitated that on the endpoint for us.
So I'm curious a little bit more about your personal experience with Go. I don't know, are you still fairly hands-on, or has that, let's say, privilege been taken from you as the company's grown and things have advanced?
Right. Yeah. Somewhere in between, Okay. Certainly I think that our team here is very capable in terms of their ability to develop and utilize Go from a language perspective. And I was never felt like that I was necessarily a native Go developer. Certainly our lead engineer that started us down this path, he feels much more, native in that space than I ever have. But just from, unfortunately at this point, multiple decades of experience just in development in general, I am able to occasionally offer some expertise for the team. Typically, it's not day-to-day, hey, let me add a new feature or let me address something that's there. More often than not, it's simply, hey, let's look at this together and see if we can, understand it maybe was difficult to understand, or even, hey, this was written 10 years ago, Webb. Do you have any idea about why we did it this way?
Yeah.
It doesn't seem right. And being able to offer the expertise there. But I definitely agree with the sentiment in terms of it being a privilege. It's hard for someone whose kind of career has been built around being hands-on and developing new and interesting things to let some of that go in a real term and have others kind of pick up the reins and move forward with it. It's doubly difficult when, you care as much about it as you do in terms of building a company, building an organization, building a product. But you have to, right?
Right.
Otherwise, the other team members don't get their opportunity, and you certainly can't scale yourself out of being just a single person. So,
Exactly.
That's definitely something that you end up having to let go.
Well, there's two questions we like to ask all of our guests on this show. I primed you a little bit before we started recording. The first one is, let's say you're forced to add a feature to Go. And in this case, I want to broaden that to just say the Go community, the Go ecosystem. What's something that you think would be useful to add to Go in the largest general sense?
Yeah. And thank you for priming me a little bit on this one. As I've thought about it, one of the things that we do here at Canopy is, and I know that this is a little bit different from the way that the Go community works at large, but we are developing a proprietary product. And part of the challenges that we've had over the years is for private repositories within Go. It's not that you can't do it, because you certainly can, and we've been able to work through those things. But just more of the native kind of, especially when it comes to like getting a new developer up to speed on and building and developing within our system, it takes longer than I'd like for it to. And most of that is just because of the challenges with dealing with repositories that aren't public in nature. And so I think, that's something that the Go community can kind of look at, where does and where do they want, that support to live, be able to build and distribute things that aren't necessarily public,
Awesome. Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for improvement around working with private repositories. Something I've done at a number of companies, and it's always a bit of a pain. Let's flip that around a little bit. Let's suppose you had the option to remove something from Go. What or the Go ecosystem or community? Are there any warts you think we could get rid of?
Yeah, I'll tell you that recently have gotten engaged with the Go for Black community there, and really have kind of had my eyes opened a little bit to the amount of support that is out there from the community, which I think is fantastic. For us personally, we do have some challenges around hiring new resources to work in Go. And so from a wart perspective, I think it's not necessarily a wart of the technology or even of the community. It's just reflective, I think, the challenges that you have with great people and great developers to work in, the products that we're really passionate about. And then the other aspect of that is cross training. Sometimes we'll need to have a member of our development team work briefly within the space that is the Go space, and then maybe transition back to some of the other work that they do. And that cross training and just the ability to have like a really good way to transition from what aren't functional languages, which may be more object-oriented languages, into a functional language, and some of the nuances that brings from, especially from a Go perspective, is difficult for us. And that might be the case for everyone, but anything that, we could have that would ease that transition from one technology to another, from a concept perspective, even down to just the simple, how do I, X, and the ability to be able to find that information quickly is something that we could definitely use more of from the community. I will say, just briefly, the emergence of some of the, generative AI technology certainly helping there, because they're able to, how do I do X and whatever, whether it's Go or Bash shell or Java or whatever the case is, able to help answer those questions quickly. But there's, at least in my opinion, there's no substitute for the been there, done that, and the ability for someone not to get past just the, hey, here's a bit of code that works, but here's a bit of code that works, and here's why it works. And, because you've got to solve the next problem, not the one that's in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think switching from especially an object-oriented language to Go is a little bit of a learning curve because Go looks object-oriented at first glance, and then you realize it's not really doing the same thing sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, thread management within Go is something that we've seen pop up for us as a challenge from time to time, and that's always a tough one because suddenly you've got, especially for us, where our product is running on these small devices at the endpoint, limited resources. If we suddenly have just threads that are being spawned, and not controlled, then we can quickly eat up resources, crash a device, and that's no good. And so that area and the way that Go handles it makes it super easy to do, but then not necessarily as transparent, especially if someone who's coming from an object-oriented point of view into Go, then it can definitely cause some headaches.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Webb, before we wrap up, is there anything that I failed to ask or failed to talk about that you think is important?
I appreciate that, Jonathan. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I'd encourage the audience to visit gocanopy.com, see what we're all about. And, if you guys are interested in helping us along our journey, we're always open to talking to passionate developers. And we'd be excited to hear from you.
Awesome. So yeah, gocanopy.com is the website. They have social media links at the bottom of the page. So if you want to follow them on LinkedIn, it looks like you have a YouTube channel, Twitter, all the fun places. Are you a remote company? I mean, for anybody listening, or do we need to focus on specific regions if someone wants to work for you?
Yeah, we are. We're headquartered in Atlanta, just north of Atlanta, in the Alpharetta area, for those that are familiar. But we do have development presence across the United States, and we don't particularly have the situation where we demand to have folks here in Atlanta when we hire. Now, for those that are in Atlanta, we certainly have time that we try to spend with each other in the office each week, and we find that to be quite valuable just in terms of cooperation and collaboration. But we also have fully remote employees, Illinois, Texas, all over the place.
Great. Well, thanks, Webb. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for talking about your experience with Go and teaching us about Canopy. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Until next time.